Hey guys, to help run the forums, host the website, and travel, we've introduced a universal service fee for in-depth coverage, including this video. The goal is to be transparent and unbiased. This is not an endorsement. It's a privilege to serve you. Let's get into it. Hey guys, what's going on? So I am here checking out the Propella version 3.0 in the 7-speed variant. It's a pretty cool electric bike at a slamming price point. So let's go ahead and jump into the bike and talk about the details. All right, so if you're not familiar with Propella is an electric bike company that makes more or less just one electric bike, and then they constantly upgrade it. Their primary method of getting the bikes out is through crowdfunding campaigns. So they'll make a certain production run of, say, version 2, and then they will sell out through that and then move on to version 2.2 or 2.4. In this case, we got 3.0. So there's a few upgrades that I'll get into first, and then after that we'll talk about the mechanical system, the electric system, and then we will hit the road. So the main upgrades for version 3.0 are these two spots right here. So this is a totally new battery casing and battery mount that works right here. So that's pretty neat. The battery is still a 36 volt 7 amp hour battery, so it's a fairly small battery, but of course, you know, we're comparing this to the price point it's at. But the 36 volt 7 amp hour battery is now in a totally new case. In the older case, it had a push button for seeing the state of charge. On this one, it's almost like a touch screen. Hopefully it kind of lights up here. It's not terribly bright outside today. See if I can get a different angle to get a little bit of shadows on there. So you just kind of tap it with your finger like a touch screen. Let's see, then it will boot up and it'll show you the current state of charge with little LEDs coming out through there, and then it'll turn off. So we turn it on again. Whoop. Kind of cycles through. So that's pretty cool. It gives it kind of a space age sort of touch. It doesn't have that tactile sort of button on there. It's just a one button press. The other part about it is the mounting system. So on the older ones, it would actually mount in the bottom first, then it would latch into kind of a parallel with the bar, and then it would sort of sink into position going down, moving down towards the bottom bracket. In this case, it actually goes the other way. So let's go ahead and unlock the battery. The battery actually comes in first from the top. So this is the battery. It's kind of nice in the form factor side of things. I actually think it's pretty cool. The older one had this kind of big horn sort of handle on the top. Not my favorite feature, but some people use it to quickly grab the battery or perhaps clip it to something. I'm not sure. But in this case, it's pretty small. Smaller, I'm sure. So the battery actually goes in first on the top to kind of get into a nice little spot, and then it sinks down into the mount, and then you turn the key to lock it into position, and then you're in business. So that's how the battery mounts on here. The battery capacity is the same. From what I understand, the controller is the same as well. It's a 14 amp controller. I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of tweaked it a little bit, because it feels kind of peppy, in my opinion, for a 250 watt motor and a 14 amp controller. So it's doing pretty good. So that battery is one of the main changes to the version 3.0. Another main change is actually the fork. So on the fork here, the older one was fairly narrow, and it was narrow the whole way. On this one, they've actually redone the fork as well as the headset and the head tube up here. So this fork has, it starts out wide and then kind of goes smaller towards the bottom where you get to the dropout area. With the headset, they've actually redone that as well. So this one now has sealed cartridge bearings. It's actually tapered. It starts out about 1 inch on the top and gets towards, I'd say, 1.5 inches on the bottom. And they have this nice little cone over here to kind of keep things cinched down. So that's actually a pretty cool upgrade to it. And one last thing about the fork here is that they actually have a little spot right here to mount a front rack. So some of the front racks or front fenders actually have a spot here to mount, and then they come up here and then mount to perhaps the headset or the stem up there. So in this case, this bike actually comes with these little spots right here from the get-go. And that's a pretty cool thing, because you can mount something on here for even a light if you wanted to. You can get a light on there to just kind of point forward, because the bike doesn't have lights to come with it. But yeah, that's a pretty cool thing. It also has this little spot right here that theoretically could mount a fender, but the clearance is pretty low. And I was actually reading the Propella website this morning, and they said that in the upcoming 3.2 version, past the one that I'm reviewing right now, they're actually going to increase the clearance here so that you can get a fender in the front there. So yeah, this is a good example of some of the smaller details that Propella as a company is paying attention to. Of course, they started with version 1.0, and they've made a lot of changes since then, but the price point remains the same. This is the 7-speed system, so this one comes in at $12.99. If you wanted to get the single-speed version, then that drops the price down a little bit lower. So those are some of the main upgrades. One last thing that I did notice when doing the review and going over it with the measuring tape and everything is that the handlebars are about ½ an inch shorter from side to side. And that's something that I compared with the previous electric bike review before jumping into measuring this bike. So it's just little itty-bitty things like that that make the bike a tiny bit better every time. So that's pretty cool. So this bike starts off with some pretty tall tires. These are a 700C tire that you have here. These are a 700 by 32, so they're a little bit wide when it comes to the road tires, if you want to call them that. They have the 32 for the width, and that's a tiny bit of width. It's a tiny bit, and it makes a big difference, because if you have something that's like a 700 by 28, that shrinks it down a little bit more, and then of course that lower second number gets tinier and tinier and tinier. And if you're on a road bike, you definitely want something, for efficiency's sake, as thin as a pizza cutter if you could get it. But in this case, it has a little bit of width to it, and I actually do like these size of tires myself personally. I ride a conventional bike at home that has this same size. One thing I am a little jealous of is that this bike does have the reflective sidewalls on the tire. My personal bike doesn't. That's pretty cool, because a lot of accidents that happen for bicycles when they come into contact with cars is from the side. And there's 1,000 bikes out there that have headlights and taillights on them, which are great and necessary and legal, or a legal necessity in a lot of places. But side reflection is another important point to get you seen on the road. So I definitely like that they have the reflectors on here. This is kind of like an added feature that I wouldn't expect for a bike at this price point. So I like that a lot. These rims are an anodized rim, and of course they have this really tall portion to them. So these are actually what's called a deep section, where the rim doesn't come up to just there, maybe ½ an inch or so. It actually comes in what appears to be about 2 inches or so, and then that's when the spoke screw starts, and then the spoke, of course. So that's pretty neat, because it does make the spokes a little bit smaller in length. They don't have to be quite as long. Definitely builds out the aesthetic as well. So that's kind of a nice feature. The spokes, of course, coming into the 100mm hub spacing up front with a 9mm quick release. So you do have a quick release. That's a nice feature as well. Again, for the price, it's kind of surprising. Kind of standard equipment for the 100mm hub spacing up front. This comes into the Shimano mechanical disc brakes. So these are Shimano TX on the Tourney line. So on Shimano, they have kind of a hierarchy of their component levels. And Tourney, the Tourney set is at the bottom. There's a Tourney TX, I think there's a Tourney LT, I forget the initials, but there's like Tourney LT, Tourney, and then Tourney TX, or maybe it's backwards. But I know that this is on the lower end of the Shimano lineup. But Shimano still makes some pretty good stuff, and the most important part is that they're not that tough to fix. So the cables do get stretched out after a while, after some steady use, and you'll have to tighten them back up again. Or you could go into any bike shop and have that done. And these are, of course, since they're Shimano, they're super easy for any bike shop to work on. So that's a nice thing, is that they stuck with, albeit not terribly expensive, they still stuck with the brand name on here for the mechanical disc brakes. That's going into a 160mm rotor up in the front. And that's that silver disc right in here. And of course, that's also mirrored by the set in the back, which is the same set for the brakes. And on the back end, you have a very similar set for the spokes as well. But that's also a tiny, tiny bit shorter, because on the front, they go into a front hub. In this case, they actually go into a hub motor. So this is a Bafang hub motor that's set for 250 watts. We'll go over that in the mechanical section, or sorry, the electrical section right now. We're trying to focus on mechanical. One last thing I should mention about the tire is that the tire and wheel and tube assembly does have a really long stem for the valve. So this valve stem is pretty long, because the tube is still up here, you know, comprising the space in between the tread of the tire. But that stem has to be pretty darn long. So if you're going to be looking for tubes online, that would be it can be pretty intimidating because there's a lot of sizes to consider. There's the diameter, there's the width, there's also the stem, and if you wanted to get like a different thickness for flat protection or something like that. So you walk into a bike shop and you tell them what kind of bike you have, they could probably look up a picture, and from a picture they could say, oh yeah, I know exactly what that is. So, but yeah, make sure you get a longer stem if you're out there shopping on your own. So on the gearing side of things, on the front, you do have a 46 tooth chain ring, and I actually counted that by hand because in the previous review, it was a 44 tooth chain ring, and then they had changed it to a 46. So that's what you have on the front chain ring. So that gives you a pretty good range for keeping resistance up on the pedals. That goes into the chain, and this chain is actually covered in what appears to be some kind of white coating. I don't believe it's a zinc coating. I think it's only just for color because it's kind of flaking off. You can see it's being eaten up a tiny bit by the gears in here. So I think that they did that perhaps to keep the aesthetic looking pretty good, to something to kind of give it a little bit of color to match some of the lettering that they have on the battery and on the down tube as well. But nonetheless, it comes into the gearing back here. So this is a 14 to 28 tooth cassette in the back from Shimano. So again, they kept the name brand for Shimano, having that nice cassette back here, but it is, you know, a fairly narrow gear range. And this is, of course, a 7-speed set. If you wanted to opt for the single speed, then that would, of course, that would narrow your gear range significantly to just one gear in the back. This has a Shimano Altus for the derailleur back here. I actually like the Altus. It's not terribly high. There is another step down on the Shimano hierarchy, but the Shimano Altus, for me at least, works perfectly well, and I like it a lot. In this case, I actually did take the motor cable off of the bike because I took the back wheel off of the bike a little bit earlier, so that's kind of here. Normally it's being pinned up like so. So don't let that bug you. That's something that I actually did myself. The seat is fairly narrow, so it doesn't have a whole lot of height. It doesn't have a whole lot of width. It's kind of a base model seat, but it does fit the nice coloring. It does have the blue on the back, on the side, so it definitely looks good. As far as comfort, I wouldn't rank it terribly high, but you do get the added benefit of having a universal rail mount right here, so you could get more or less any seat on there if you wanted to. The diameter of the seat post is actually 27.2, so if you wanted to get a suspension seat post, like a Connect seat post or Thud Buster, that would actually fit in here just fine. So that's something you can do to kind of make the bike a little bit more approachable on the comfort side of things, because truth be told, I mean, this bike is not terribly comfortable, and you know, that's something that you kind of come to expect when you see a bike of this kind of proportions. One last thing to talk about in the center of the bike is the cranks and the pedals. These pedals are pretty cool. For the price point, again, I was kind of expecting to see something a little cheaper, like a plastic mount or something. These ones actually have aluminum alloy. These are some Neko pedals that kind of have the sort of cage on them. So I like these a lot. They're fairly simple in the sense that they don't take up a ton of space on the profile. And they spin pretty good. And also they have a good look to them because you have a nice polished chrome on the inside. I know that's kind of a small detail, but to me it sort of stands out. The cranks on this one are some Lasco cranks, 170 millimeters for length, which is kind of standard issue. So the cabling does, for the mechanical side, route on the outside of the bike frame. So right here you have some of the cabling that goes through. So that's really easy if you want to work on it, but it does kind of make the bike, you know, kind of stand out a little bit if you're comparing it to something with internal routing. The electric side of thing actually doesn't. So the electric cables actually do kind of come in here, and then they pop out on the other side to get to the battery. They get to the battery and the controller, at least. On the motor side, they have to go external, and there's really no way around that I know of. One last thing while we're down here is the bottle cage bosses. So they got them. Here at EBR, we love bottle cage bosses, so it's nice to see that they tucked them in there. It's a really nice thing. I mean, it's not as easy to get to because you got to get your arm all the way under here. So if you wanted to stop, you know, like we are now, and jump out and get a drink of water, then this would be just a fine place. I mean, albeit it would get dirty a little bit, not like it matters, it's just the outside of the bottle, but you could also put something else down here if you wanted to. So that's a really neat addition. There is some space up here but it's anyone's guess as to whether you can get the bottle on here, because bottles come in a lot of different heights, especially if you had something tall like a pump or something that probably wouldn't fit in this spacing. So putting it down here is actually nice because you have more or less, effectively limitless space to work with for a bottle, because you're not going to find much other than maybe like a 2-liter that would not fit in there. I don't know if they make 2-liter bottle cage bosses, but I'm sure it's been done somewhere. And if not, hey, I'd take one. I'd rock that. I think it'd be awesome. So coming up to the front of the bike on the mechanical side, you have a 100mm length for the stem up here that kind of gives it a tiny bit of rise, as well as the handlebars that are a tiny bit shorter than the previous one. So these ones are about 640mm wide, if I remember right off the top of my head. Go to ElectricBikeReview.com where you can see the full review for this exact bike, including all the measurements, specifications that I did myself. One of them being the weight, and remind me, we'll get to that right before we do the electric part. This is the set of shifters for the cassette that I told you in the back. It's a fairly standard set for the lower end of the Shimano lineup, but they work just fine. And like I said, I use this exact set on my personal bike. It's lasted me for a long time, so I got no complaints. These are the brake levers. The brake levers are fairly simple for this, and they do have a motor cutoff signal. So that's actually a nice feature to have for safety, in which it has this little magnet in here, and then when you press on the brakes, that will engage it so that it will send a signal to the motor to cut off power, no longer allowing the motor to power so long as your hands are on the brakes. So that's a pretty cool thing to kind of prevent you from any kind of mishap on the motor side of things. One last thing to talk about while we're up on the front of the bike is the grips. So the grips do have like the same anodized coating that kind of matches the blue on the wheels. And to me, this one looks a tiny bit lighter, but it's pretty cool. I like that look because it definitely rounds out the bike. You have some color on the battery, of course, on the wheels, on the seat, if you want to keep that seat, also on these grips. So it definitely keeps it looking good. If you start replacing things, it might tamper with the look. But in this case, they look nice. They lock on there nice and tight. I do like the locking feature with these little pins. But on the comfort side, they don't do a whole lot. They don't do a whole lot of comfort. They're fairly flat, so you can get a good grip on them. They're very intuitive. I can definitely say that. But they don't provide a whole lot of comfort if you're going to be riding the bike for a longer distance. So if you wanted to use this for longer commuting, I'll just throw out a number and say 10 miles at a time, which I believe the battery could do that. I think the battery could deliver you 10 miles at a time, and then you'd charge it up again. But it would not feel terribly comfortable, if you don't have a cycling experience already and have some tolerance built up for your bones on your backside. But anyways, for shorter trips, it's fine. I don't think that riding a bike with some stiff grips, some stiff seats is really that big of a thing if you're going on shorter rides, and you're always having a ton of fun on an electric bike anyway. So it's kind of hard because the time passes when you're having fun. So this is the same display that we had in the last bike, in which the bicycle is already engaged with the battery on there. The key is not necessary for ignition. It's just necessary for locking the battery onto the bike. So let's go ahead and press the power button. We'll turn on the display, and it shows us a couple things. A clock up there that I haven't quite set. Also the battery level, your assist, your miles per hour, and on the lower right you have the variable display. If you press the power button, or the button that we used for power, which has an M on it for mode, that will change the variable display from an odometer to a trip set, and then back again. It just goes between those two, so it has those two metrics, and that's it. If you press and hold the down button, that will start the walk assist. I tilted up the bike right now, so it's not going to go anywhere. But it engages the motor just a tiny bit if you want to walk alongside the bike. That is principally used in European countries where they have walkways in which you're not permitted to mount the bicycle. I don't know if those are terribly common here in the United States, but nonetheless, it's a nice feature if you wanted to walk alongside the bike up a heavy hill or, something along those lines. The bike doesn't have a throttle otherwise, so if you wanted to, you can do a very, very low speed throttle that way. If you press and hold the plus button, that will actually show you an average speed that you've done on this ride. If you press and hold the plus button again, it will go to a maximum speed that we've done on the ride, and then back to the regular miles per hour that you're currently going at that rate. Pressing and holding the plus and minus button will enter you into some of the settings, and you can change the clock up or down to change the time. Press the mode button to cycle into a new metric to change. In this case, we're looking at the backlight. So the backlight can actually go down to level 1, or you can change it up to level 3. We'll go ahead and keep it bright. And then the last one is to change from miles per hour to kilometers, and then back to the clock again. Press and hold the plus and minus, and then, oh no, press and hold the M button for mode, and then that'll get you back to the main menu. So it's a fairly simple display, not a whole lot to it, and honestly I kind of like it that way. It seems somewhat durable, albeit it's on a plastic mount, and you can kind of move it around a tiny bit, not terribly flexible. But in my opinion, I really like simple displays. In this case, it tells me what I want to know, and that's fine. That's fine by me. If you wanted to count calories or count distance, things like that, then you might want to, search around for a larger display, but that's, neither here nor there. Electrically, we did kind of talk about the battery when we talked about some of the changes, but suffice it to say, this is a 36 volt 7 amp hour battery, so it's not a ton of capacity there, but you can actually get a replacement battery from Propella for, in my opinion, a fairly good price. $250 will get you a replacement battery for the bike, which is pretty good. I think that's a fair price for getting it, because batteries comprise a large part of the total cost of the bike, more expensive than any other single component. So in that case, it's pretty good. It's fairly lightweight, so you could carry another one in your bag and not feel it as much as the big capacity battery. So there are some, balances here or there. With this battery right here, I think it's a good choice. The controller, of course, is built into the bottom right here, which is a good thing to have the controller built in close to the battery. It's actually a nice thing on the electric side of things. The pedal assist is actually a cadence-based pedal assist system. So that means that the motor is told what to do based on the rotations of the cranks here. Of course, we're going backwards, so it's not going to go anywhere. Maybe I should turn this off just to be safe. All right, turn that guy off. All right. So when you pedal the bike forwards, it counts how many rotations you're doing, and then it will give you assistance based on that metric. And that's what pedal assist is when it's a cadence-based system. And in this case, you have a sealed sensor, and this is one of the upgrades that they've done for version 3. Is that in the previous version that we did on EBR, it had an external system where you see a disc about yay big with magnets on it that you could totally count and see it passing through. In this case, it's sealed into the bottom bracket, which has been redone by Propella. So that's a pretty cool thing. You're not going to see this get gunked up too much and have it affect any of the ride. So it also keeps things nice and slim. So that's a nice upgrade that they've done, is with the sealed sensor rather than external. So that's the pedal assist system. Coming into the motor, this is a Bafang 250 watt motor. Not a whole lot to talk about on the motor side of things, but it is from a company that has made amazing strides in the industry in the last few years. At one point a few years ago, they were known, in the United States at least, they were known for just conversion systems, and they've since gone into the OEM market with a vengeance. So you see the Bafang motors all over the place on the OEM side of things, meaning that it's a motor that is spec'd with a bicycle from the get-go. And so this bicycle was definitely designed with that system in mind. So that's the electric system from front to back. That is the mechanical system as well, with the upgrades at the very beginning. So let's go ahead and jump on the bike and go down the road, my favorite part. Okay, so here we go down the road on the Propella version 3.0. One thing that I forgot to mention when we were going over the specifications is that they're already on to version 3.2, which has had a couple of smaller upgrades to it, not as much of the changes that we have already covered with version 3.0 compared to the previous 2.2. So 3.2 is upcoming with some minor upgrades. This one is 3.0, so expect everything that you've seen me listed with, a tiny bit more for the next production run that they got going on. But the bike performs as I would expect. It's a very simple system. It reminds me of a lot of the fixie style kind of electric bikes, but it's pretty nimble, I gotta say. It's fairly lightweight. I weighed this bicycle coming in at about 38.2 pounds. Previously, the bike was weighing in at about 37 pounds when it was last reviewed on EBR. On the website for Propella, they say that the weight is 34 pounds. I believe that they're weighing it without the battery pack.
And in my case, I weighed it with the battery pack. So I think that's the reason for the discrepancy between the two. It's not uncommon for some companies to weigh it with or without the battery pack. You know, trying to keep the numbers down, trying to get the bike out there, you know, make it look great, and you know, makes sense. That's what they do. As far as how the bike rides, the pedal assist is pretty predictable. I mean, it is a cadence-based system, so if we go ahead and leave it in a high gear, like super high, let's go ahead and hit those brakes. Okay, so if we leave it in a really high mechanical gear, level 7, and then we start going, okay, that's not so bad. That's about like, oh, it's not half a rotation, it's not 180 degrees before it picks up. It's a little between a quarter and a half, so maybe from the 1 o'clock to the like 4 o'clock position or so. And if this is not a scientific test at all, this is me just kind of goofing around on the bike. But right now I have it set for pedal assist level 1. Let's go ahead and crank it to 5 and see if we can get it to pick up. Okay, so same thing. It was about a little before the 6 o'clock position, so not quite 180 degrees when I was doing it just there. But again, that's not something you're going to be doing terribly often, but it picks up a lot quicker. I've seen bikes that have to do a full rotation, possibly 1.5 before they pick up. So that little sealed sensor for the pedal assist is doing pretty good. It's reading pretty quickly, and that's you know, kind of one of the drawbacks to a cadence system is that they don't read as fast as torque, but they are really easy on the other side of things. When you get the bike moving, you know, you get a little bit of momentum, and then after you get a little momentum, you kind of scale it back. So you can scale it back into, say, 1 mechanical gear, and then crank up the pedal assist, and then all you got to do is just rotate the pedals as a formality, and then it will kind of kick in. And this bike is no exception. So that's a pretty cool feature if you have some knee issues. You know, maybe you've had some surgery recently and you're trying to do some rehabilitation, and all you got to do is just a slight amount of pressure, and whoop, I forgot. You do a slight amount of pressure and that's all you need to get things going on your rehabilitation side. Then yeah, a cadence-based system is actually pretty cool. So let's go ahead and pedal up here a little bit. I gotta say, I like these brakes. With rim brakes, which is a common choice for cheaper bikes, with rim brakes, they don't do very well in the rain, and right now it's raining on us. So I definitely like these disc brakes. They work pretty good. On the mechanical side of things, for like mechanical versus hydraulic, they don't bite nearly as much, and of course the mechanical ones need a little bit more babysitting, but it's pretty good. I like them. I'm not going to complain. I like these brakes. I'll just go ahead and say it right outright. I like the brakes. So let me go ahead and switch the camera position, and then we'll kind of wrap things up. I don't want you to stay with me too much getting waterlogged, so yeah, let's do it. All right, guys, I've got it cranked all the way up to level 5 pedal assist, and I got you pointed down at the bottom bracket area with the pedals, the batteries. I think you can see a little bit of the motor as well. So let's go ahead and take it for a spin. Okay, that was fun. Got a nice little runway there to go up on speed. So yeah, it was pretty fun. It picks up pretty quick, and that's something I kind of mentioned prior, that the pedal assist with that sealed sensor, I think it reads a little bit faster than the 12 magnet from the last one. Wouldn't surprise me at all. So fun stuff. All right, guys, thanks for checking out the Propella version 3.0 in the 7-speed variant with me. It's been a lot of fun to ride it around. It's really cool to see bikes that are put at a better price point, because it really gets electric bikes out there. There are some compromises. If you know what you're getting into, then I think it'll be a really good choice for you. So if you want to check out the full written review for this bicycle, along with all the measurements, all the specifications and weight, go to ElectricBikeReview.com. While you're there, you can compare it with all sorts of other electric bikes that are out there in the great wide open that we've done before. So thanks for watching, guys. Ride safe.